Could could one of my panelists be so kind to put timestamps in the chat, please?
Yes.
Fantastic. But please also time yourselves. You're all big enough for that. And without further ado, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to open the debate. Here.
Okay, I'm putting on my camera. Right. If people could ask PYs in the chat, that's probably easiest, I think. Okay. Sora as a technology is something that is ultimately going to entirely change the way in which we're able to make videos in the first instance. We think this is very bad for the artists that are currently involved in the production of like film and generally like videos in general. But secondly, we think this can also be used in really harmful ways to make bad types of videos. A couple points to set up first. First of all, by ban we just mean just not let it be allowed into the public, not continue the development of it. And that's pretty self-explanatory. This would never become something that's accessible to the public. Secondly, in terms of what Sora like is and the types of things that it can be used for, I think it can be used in a professional capacity. That's to say, it can often be used in things like the film and TV industry to do things like edit specific things, to add specific scenes into your films, to, I don't know, come up with like special effects to various different types of things. This is a way in which is probably likely to be implemented in the future. When it becomes public, we think companies probably have an incentive to be able to use it within their production of films, etc. But in the second way it can be used is just on an individual personal use, right? I think most people probably just like use their phones, their iPhones to like video something if they think it looks pretty outside. So realistically, the types of people that are likely to use this on a personal use are either like artists themselves or just in general people that want to use it for bad things. We'll get on to talk about this a little bit later. I think thirdly, last point I set up, in terms of the Infoside saying that they're likely to be professionals or other people consulted about this. While this is the case now and artists might have been consulted as to whether or not their software is like good or bad, we think into the long term, they're unlikely to be able to have much creative control over the way in which this AI continues to evolve. That's to say that AI is a constantly evolving thing that evolves at a really, really fast rate. And the more people use it, the more data this AI has to be able to use to like generate other things in the first instance. So we think the less control the creative individuals maybe have over being able to push the AI in certain ways, and therefore you're less likely to get the AI being of good quality or something that is going to be beneficial to artists. Okay, first point then on how this harms artists and why that's really bad. So we think this is likely to be used Sora is likely to be used for a number of reasons. One, because it's much faster, right? Obviously, it's faster to plug in data into a computer and ask it to generate something than it is to have someone have to painstakingly sit there and actually animate specific like characters on a screen, like specifically put like create scenes themselves. This requires a lot of time, a lot of effort, and is a much slower process than just asking a computer to do it. Secondly, I think like because it's far cheaper to do as well. Obviously, it takes you have to pay lots of people like lots of money in order to be able to do lots of things like creatively, right? The software like is expensive in the first instance. People's time is precious in the second instance. And what this means is it's probably far cheaper just to be able to ask people to plug in data into a computer. So I think this is likely to be something that is therefore is used in a lot of places, particularly like within industries such as the film and TV industry, because they're able to therefore cut their costs in terms of production, but also speed up the production. These are two incentives that companies have in order to be able to undercut their competitors and be able to produce the most art, gain the most like profit in the first instance. What does this mean then? One, I think it means that artists like lose their jobs on a massive scale, but particularly artists, first of all, that work in production like in the first instance, right? So that's people that work in like video editing for like films or whatever it might be. These are the people that are most likely to lose their jobs as a result of this, because of the fact that like they're no longer needed and there's some other thing that you're able to use for them. No, these are like massive amounts of people. There are huge departments that are there in order to be able to like creatively like have films and have animation like on TV. So I think these are the most likely people that are going to get like cut from this. But the second thing here is I think artists just in general lose the ability to compete with this AI software, right? So even if individual artist, so thank you, that enjoys making YouTube videos for like a small audience, when there is now an AI that's able to do this, people are able, don't have to rely on you for this content. There are people who are able to produce this content themselves. People are also able to do it at a cheaper price. What this means is that you also lose your competitive advantage here, and you're unable to compete with this AI, so you yourself lose your job. I want to note here then that these artists are particularly vulnerable because they've probably given up a lot of time, a lot of money, their entire careers to go into these industries. And which you massively remove their capacity to be able to work in these places, they probably end up with no job. Often these are skills that aren't particularly transferable, right? So you go into like video producing, and this is probably something which means that you're unable to transfer to a lot of other different types of art forms because they require really, really high levels of specification. So you can't just like become a painter overnight, right? What this means is you're probably unlikely to be able to find jobs in other places, particularly as the competitiveness means that lots of industries are likely to adopt the same, or lots of TV producers are likely to adopt the same usage of this. And therefore, I think you massively limit the extent to which these people are able to access things like money in the first instance. The artists become poorer and are just able to like financially survive. But I think a second impact to artists is they're less able to have like creative control over their art. They're less able to gain catharsis from the art that they make. This is often the reason people go into art in the first place, because they want to express themselves, they want to send a message. And when you're unable to do this, you limit people's agency insofar as they're unable to create this art and like explain messages to society that they might really, really care about. I think the second way in which this massively harms artists is because AI fundamentally steals artists' art, right? That's to say that it takes lots of data and it takes artists' art that already exists and it overlays it on top of things. Like tweaks it minorly and then just gives it back to you, right? I think what this means is that art is stolen and it's not giving any credit to the artist who originally made it, nor do they receive any financial compensation for the art that's been created, right? So ultimately, the comparative here, people can take, no thank you, inspiration from other people's pieces of art, but isn't an actual threat insofar as it's not stealing their art. I think it's a principal harm when the AI is likely to steal people's art and they're unable to ever gain any credit for the art that is actually being made here. I'll take a POI from CO.
Yeah, so Disney produces shitty movies. If I am producing a movie that is better at home, what is the incentive for me to now go watch a Disney movie?
Okay, so I think Disney produces often first of all doesn't often just produce entirely shitty movies, but like generally I think that if you're able to produce the film at home, that's fine, but you're not going to then watch films in the cinemas. I think this has a massive consequence for everyone that works at Disney. This is like a massive conglomeration that has lots and lots of employees that they want to be able to pay, and these people are then unlikely to be able to access salaries if there's less revenue going to Disney. Second point then on the types of art that's like to produce and why this becomes worse. I think the first thing to say here is that art fundamentally becomes worse because it's often devoid of human emotion. Because I think people really enjoy the way in which art is produced because there's a script to it, the way it was cut, the way it's stylized in the first place, something people just enjoy about art. I think art fundamentally becomes less meaningful when there isn't this part of it in the first place, when there isn't a human being controlling this or deciding specific things. It's just AI generating this. And so I think therefore art just becomes less good under opposition's side of the house. Sure, maybe they get more of this art, but I don't think it is as on net as good in terms of its quality of actually being made here, right? I think what this means is that art just becomes something that people are less interested in, see as more superficial, don't see as engaging, don't see as having any level of human empathy or desire to engage with. And that's when people also fund things like art projects less because they don't think art is of any meaningful value. But the second thing here is I think art becomes worse in terms of the types of art that are likely to be created. Because know that there can be lots of harmful types of art that are created. People that are most likely to use this software are people that don't have access to software to create film in the first place, but want to create bad types of film that they don't get access to in any other mainstream way. So they create things like deepfakes, they create things like really harmful porn, which has very negative images, because this is the unique way in which they're able to do it. I think the comparative is people don't have access to this. This is good insofar as they're unable to make art that's actually just detrimental and shows things that are bad and harmful to society. For these reasons, OG.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech, and I'd now like to call upon the leader of the opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Where's the timer? Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First, let's talk about bad art and how it's going to be used badly. I think there's a significant element of regulation that exists in which you can regulate the art. You don't have to regulate the art form, but just the subject matter. Why do we think that's true? One, we think when a technology becomes significantly accessible and it does incur a significantly wider user base, it's naturally going to lead to much more larger regulation, meaning that legislators are now going to put it as policy concerns, right? Secondly, in terms of individuals, because they're going to use it more, you're going to have more consumer literacy as to whether or not the things that you're talking about, whether they be deepfakes, etc., are worse off or not. But third, we think even in terms of preventive mechanisms, you can have ideas like watermarks or perhaps embedded metadata within this art created, which have significant preventive mechanisms which prevent the sort of deep fake or bad porn that they're trying to make this out to be. But secondly, I think there's an active characterization of development that's present within the Infoslide itself, in which it says that Sora is developed with consultation with individuals already present within the industry, meaning that the development in and of itself is not assertive but only assistive, meaning it seeks to exist within the existing ecosystem of human artists, etc. Meaning at that particular moment, the development isn't necessarily going to be that OpenAI now wants to make bad art or a form of necessarily encourage the creation of the bad art, right? Because there is an added incentive, one, to win over the public in terms of the public actively embracing AI created art as a form of legitimate art and also something you can place your trust in. But second, there's also significant competition with other AI developers, right? There's also significant competition in terms of investment, meaning that people only invest if they see this as a credible public project, meaning that individuals can only, or investment banks, etc., can only engage with it if they believe that it doesn't incur the sort of harms that doesn't happen. And so we think it's naturally going to have a larger push towards regulation in the first place. But this is where we think their whole analysis about art and catharsis becomes important, right? Because the problem with art at the present moment is that human effort is limited by natural constraints, meaning that you need a significant amount of resources to create art. If you're perhaps a movie maker, you need a significantly large army of people to make even a decently sized movie. And if you're even a writer, you have to be divorced from your job or to have significantly divorced from your job or make time up for the creation of that particular art. The catharsis of my art is not particularly only in the effort, but also in the creation of what I envisage it to be. And this is where we clash with the framing of what AI art is, because we think at the end of the day, it's still going to stem from human innovation and human ideas, because humans use AI to create art, meaning that it's a human idea that's being materialized through the form in and of itself. At that particular moment, we don't think there's any significant lack of catharsis or stealing of this particular artistic legitimacy from artists themselves. And second, their idea about art is stealing because you know what? It takes away from existing material. Yes, almost all art takes away from every single art that already exists before it. At that particular moment, you're always going to learn about ideas from another place, right? Meaning there's never an original idea because you're already looking at other movies or other books or other art forms that you've read to make up new art. So in everything, you do have some element of inspiration. Calling inspiration something that is stealing is significantly important, right? Because we think there will still exist adequate mechanisms that say, you know what, this is plagiarized. You know what, inside the consumer base of that particular art, if something is so evidently similar, no one watches Guy Van Sant's Psycho remake because it's a shot-by-shot remake of Alfred Hitchcock, because everyone thinks it's shit. People only consider new art to be which is significantly different or at least inspirational in at least some distinct capacity. Fourth, in terms of whether or not artists lose jobs, right? We think the economy is fluid. You're always going to have some sort of new jobs that will be created. And we already see this happening with AI consultants on artistic mediums, right? Because understand, just because you have AI, it does not mean that you will have great art being produced instantly. You will still have to put in human effort. And this is where the last point comes in. Because art necessarily requires human emotion, and because art requires some degree of human intervention in terms of styling, in terms of directorial inputs, in terms of what you want to do with it, at that particular moment, we think individuals are always going to be required to work and function within Sora in and of itself. So it doesn't necessarily mean. But moving on to our own arguments, right? But before that, from closing government, if there is a PY.
At all points of time, they are likely to collect data from each and every businessman in the world. Don't you think that can lead to some problems?
I think in terms of, again, this is again in terms of regulation, you can always control metadata usage as you've already done with a lot of existing technology. But secondly, if that's the point of your argument, then perhaps don't use technology at all, because you're always going to lose out some metadata in terms of engaging with the internet. In terms of why we think it leads to a more greater democratization of Hollywood in general, we think Hollywood is constrained by capacities of privilege and wealth, meaning that individuals are only able to engage with it if they have money, if they have significant connections in terms of nepotism, etc., or in terms of general art forms, even apart from Hollywood, in that you are constrained by the degree of privilege that you have. We think the accessibility of Sora is that it allows individuals to create art free from these constraints, meaning that it's able to, at that particular moment, create some art form, create a more democratized art form in which all individuals are able to use it. This is literally opening governments framing themselves when they say personal people can use it inside their own homes. We think the vast majority of individuals are deprived of catharsis and artistic endeavors because they can't move towards it because of the constraints that we've already mentioned. But secondly, we also think it creates a much more greater workforce. In one, individuals and corporations already look towards profit. This is why literally Rockstar overworks their workers when they're creating games, because they don't want to pay them, but they want them to work more so that they can work towards gaming deadlines and crunch them. We think at that particular moment, corporations already have an added incentive to harm these workers. This harm is alleviated by the presence of this software or similar softwares, because now you don't have the burden of overtiming or overworking individuals in and of themselves. But third, opportunities still exist in the job market. The graphic design industry at this moment is the most diverse it's ever been. You know what, UI, UX design, etc. But also just in terms of whether or not you have existing base mediums and consultancy to base AI software off of it. We think individuals will still be likely to acquire new jobs in and of themselves to work towards them, and for all those reasons, opening opposition.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. And to close up the opening government bench of this debate, I'd now like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, three clashes at the moment in this debate. Firstly, on whether this technology is likely to be good and legislated. Secondly, on whether this art is likely to be good. And thirdly, whether it's likely to be more accessible and whether that's a benefit. So firstly, whether the technology is more likely to be legislated. 4 reasons why it's unlikely to get the benefits that opening opposition talk about like increased consumer literacy or increased sort of regulation. Firstly, oftentimes you just cannot regulate this type of technology, right? If anyone can use Sora from their basement, then anyone can create these deepfakes and cause this amount of harm. So you can't really stop people from doing this in the first place. But secondly, at the point at which opening opposition conceded that there's likely to be more power to those companies, they're making more money. OpenAI is able to get more investment, for example, if they're able to produce this technology. Then that also means that OpenAI has far more lobbying power. They can prevent policies which stop them from being able to roll out their AI to the extent to which they want. They can stop the regulation of their technology, which probably means that they aren't able to accrue the same amount of regulation which they want in the first place. But I think thirdly, as Zainab already framed, that the development of AI is likely to happen incredibly fast as well. So it's likely to build off itself and become very complex very quickly. We've seen ChatGPT evolve like humongously in the past like 3 years. So it's very hard for policymakers, especially people who are old and boomers, to be able to regulate against these kinds of things because they probably just don't have the capacity to be able to do this. They don't know what they're supposed to do to be good. But I think fourthly, I think the people that they're working alongside to develop this technology that OpenAI are working alongside probably aren't those small consumers which we're valuing a lot in the debate. They're probably not the people who are likely to lose their jobs. The people that OpenAI are developing this technology with are probably industry leaders, people who probably have connections to OpenAI, which means that they're probably not getting the best like reception or the best feedback on their like whatever, like their AI, just because we don't think that they're asking the right types of people. But even if you don't think this is important, but we think probably the harms to the existence of a greater number of deepfakes happening probably outweighs the ability to regulate this in the first place, given that people can do this from their basement, right? Because the harm that a deepfake creates for somebody, if you see this online, if you see a deepfake of yourself online, that probably creates a huge amount of emotional struggle for you. It's incredibly hard to remove a deepfake of yourself from online as well, because it's been like produced by somebody somebody who's like from their own basement, which probably means it like leaves a huge amount of emotional scarring. So if we have a greater amount of this happening on our side of the house, then I think we're probably able to win the debate based off of this as well, because we think it's incredibly detrimental for people to face this in the first place. Now, talking about good art and whether it's likely to be good art in the first place. Now, opening opposition say that you're able to open new avenues of art, so people can also be inspired based off of this art. But I think the reason why lots of art is good in the first place is because it's based off of like specifics and why you specifically created the art in the way that you did. But given you're making an AI create art, so like for example, why you cut a video in a specific place, or why you inserted a meme in a certain bit of the video, or why, for example, you wrote a certain bit of the script. But given AI is the thing which is doing this, then it's not creating good art in the first place. So it's probably like lots of the specifics behind the amount of effort that was created, that was used to create the art, which is also about creating good art, which we're just unable to physically unable to access to the same extent when you're just typing into a chat box the thing that you want the AI to produce in the first place. Now, onto the claim as to whether this is likely to be stealing or not, because opening opposition do have a fair response where they're like, well, humans get inspiration from other bits of other like echelons of society or other films as well, so it's probably not likely to be as bad. Two responses. Firstly, humans are far more likely to credit the things which they're taking from. So humans very often talk about the inspiration which they've received from another film. Stranger Things talks about how it has inspirations from the Goonies, because that's just something which is fun to talk about on chat shows. AI has no capacity to do this in the first place. So it probably is like stealing to a greater extent, because you're not giving the person you're stealing from any sort of benefit from that in the first place. But secondly, you're also far more likely to steal as well, because AI is directly ripping exact scenes. They're using exact data from the databases about the film, whereas humans are taking like inspiration from things, ideas. They're thinking about the creative vision behind things and then interpreting them and making something new, whereas AI is literally overlaying different scenes on top of each other. So they're actually directly taking the exact scene which somebody else has put hours and hours of work into producing. And we think this is a huge harm in this debate, just a priori, because we think stealing is something which like strips people of their agency and strips people of their consent. You're taking something away from somebody without them being able to consent for you to do that. And we think that given AI is able to do this on a far larger scale, i.e. they're able to produce far more amounts of art, then you're also increasing the amount of stealing to a far greater extent as well, which we think is probably a harm a priori, which we want to avoid within this debate. I'll take you later. Okay, lastly, on the accessibility of art and whether this is something which is important, but also whether it's something which is likely. Firstly, I think there is just likely to be worse art which is produced in the first place, which means that accessibility of art inherently decreases. Now, I'll like explain this in a second, but if you buy the idea that art becomes worse, then it also necessarily means that art becomes less accessible, because there's less funding within art, so people are enjoying art to a lesser extent. There's less jobs which are arising because people are enjoying going to the cinema to a lesser extent, which means that the accessibility of art does decrease as well. But why is art less accessible? Zainab tells you that there is necessarily a collective action problem. If somebody else is able to produce more art faster than you, and they're able to upload more videos to their YouTube channel, if they're able to flood the market to a greater extent, or if they're able to generate a larger profit margin so that they can outcompete your art, they can price themselves down and therefore sell their art up to big producers, then this means that everybody who's creating art necessarily has to buy into AI to be able to compete within a market. And this is necessarily a harm, because obviously, as we've said, it makes the quality of the art decrease. It's not got the humanity behind it, and it's not got the intention or meaning or creativity behind the art, which means that obviously, as I said before, the art gets funded to like a lesser extent, which means it's less likely. Oh, sorry for not taking a POI. You've got speech anyway. It's less likely to be sort of good. But I think secondly, it's unclear why this is more accessible to the average person either, because presumably it gives people a footing to a similar extent to each other. Everybody can just type something into the chat box, which means that it probably doesn't give like the individual a foot up from Hollywood, because Hollywood can also use this technology against those people. We think it's unclear why this is likely to happen. Now, lastly, on the claims about productivity and whether you're likely to get lose jobs for artists in the first place, opening opposition is inherently tense with themselves, because first, still have to work the same amount. Artists aren't going to be laid off, and artists are still needed to the same capacity. Obviously, this is not true, because Zainab says you can't just like retrain into being someone who works in AI, for example. But I think they also say, which is in direct contradiction, that, for example, you have to do less work, and that's something which is good because it means that you for example, you're not overworked to the same extent. So they have to stand behind one or the other. We think the first one's not true, but we think it's probably fine if artists are overworked, so long as they're being employed, so long as they're gaining an income or they're getting recognition for the work that they're doing in the first place. We think they're probably able to like at least feed their family if they're being overworked, whereas in opening opposition, they're losing their jobs, becoming unemployed, and getting all their work stolen from. That's probably quite a huge harm.
I think to speak of a fine speech and to close up the opening half of this debate, I'd now like to call upon the deputy leader of the opposition. Here.
Can we have like 2 minutes? We're switching internet connections. The first one was having issues.
You have technically 1 minute, but
Okay.
just be fast.
Thank you.
Hi, am I both audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Let me just get my timer. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Go. The first thing that I'll talk about is employment. Government's major response is that you're going to have less jobs for these people because they're going to be replaced. I have 3 responses to this. Number 1, I think you increase these jobs on our side of the world because you create more jobs in terms of the fact that you diversify to other fields. So in terms of the fact that you have other editing approaches, etc., that you can take, or the fact that you can create coaching centers for this particular development of this AI. And also, this is important because if only lower class, if only people at the bottom are the ones that are being replaced, then these are the people who have the most amount of transferable skills. So a makeup artist in a particular theater can become a makeup artist in a salon as well. So I think the idea about like them not having transferable skills is something which falls out. Secondly, it's important to understand that consumer preferences are always going to be fluid, which means that people are going to have different preferences. Some on either side of the world are still going to prefer real art, as government talks about, which involves human actors, etc. Insofar as this is true, we are not going to replace the entire industry as a whole, which means that we still protect some jobs to an extent. Thirdly, there is a precedent. If government's major push is that you get less employment on our side of the world, then they're literally against each and every type of development that has historically ever existed. So industrial revolution to like replace a lot of jobs. The inclusion of VFX or CGI within cinematics replaced a lot of jobs. The problem then is that if you don't have a problem with that, they need to point out exclusive reasons why this employment replacement is something which is problematic. Note how they do not engage with the Bakhtiar's analysis as to why worker rights are something which are protected on 2 levels. 1, the fact that you do not overwork them, but 2, and more importantly, the fact that value of these workers essentially increases on our side of the world once they're more in demand. So now you need more people in terms of editing. You need more people to control or combine different clips, etc. Essentially means that not only do you improve the job structure or pay structure that these individuals have, but also you do not exhaust them to the point of them committing suicide. The second thing that I'll talk about is regulation in terms of deepfakes, etc. Firstly, we told you that wide consumer base is something which is a good thing because it creates pressure for legislators to actively regulate this. It does not matter like how much people they are, but what matters is that once this becomes a voter issue, you have politicians who are actively willing to fight this out. It does not matter if politicians are old. Politicians can still hire young people to regulate these particular things, but politicians also have like incentives to listen to their voter bases because of the election incentive. 2, we can have built-in mechanisms preemptively. So for instance, ChatGPT does not allow you to have overly sensitive content. These companies can do that on our side of the world, but that can crucially happen insofar as you allow of this particular AI in the first place. The third thing that I'll talk about is creative element, and government says that there's no creative element in AI art, so people don't have catharsis. 3 responses. Firstly, human expression or human involvement is not monolith as government might want you to believe. We feel that expression is something which can exist on a very subjective level. So the fact that these are individuals that are involved throughout the process. So the fact that you write your creative thought in terms of designing the script, editing, color grading, or you also like using different clips, etc., and joining those clips together involves a lot of human input. Secondly, the comparative is that we have more access to art on our side of the world. So art is not monolith. There's a reason why you have poetry, singing, dancing, debates, or like even like paintings, etc., all the stuff like that. The reason why this is important is because we feel that definition of art is something which is ever expanding and ever evolving, which means that AI art can perfectly fit under the ambit of real art. Thirdly, even if human element is the more, like, even if it's important, I don't see why that weighs in this debate. Taking a photograph does not require a lot of human element. The camera does all of the stuff for you, which means that they're also against photography. But if their response to this would be that, oh, you still need to take like a lot of angles and measure that, we have that on our side when you are involved deeply in the like production process, etc. Worst case, even if we do not have human involvement, 3 reasons why we are still better than them. Firstly, art is culturally informed. It does not exist in isolation. So if this becomes a new definition of art and people are preferring this art, we don't have a problem for that, because insofar as this is a democratic choice. Secondly, if catharsis is something which is important, then I think the tipping point of this debate is, where do we have more accessibility or greater expression for the most vulnerable stakeholders of this debate? The reason we help access or expression for the most vulnerable in this debate is threefold. Number one, we feel that Hollywood or these industries or corporate giants have a hegemony over the industry for 3 broad reasons. Firstly, historically, they have accumulated wealth, which essentially means that it comes at the cost of marginalized communities not having access to these fields. Secondly, you have capitalist incentives. So you will always employ white directors or white artists or white actors because they're more sellable. Thirdly, the fact that it operates in secrecy, which means that you do not have an incentive to call these individuals out because you're not that aware about the problems that go out in the background. The reason why this is important is because art democratization, even if it comes at the cost of limited human involvement, is important, because then individuals that did not have the ability to express their own unique circumstances can do so right now. This is especially true in the context of global south, where democratization essentially means 4 things. Firstly, you can resist Western ideals and neoliberal ideas by virtue of you protecting your cultural expression on a local and an international level, when people within these communities who did not have access to art do have access to art on our side of the world. 2, you can actively talk about taboo topics which they did not have the ability to do so before. So this looks like gender minorities, people belonging to the LGBTQ community, or women, or like other people within developing countries that do not have access to like these broad fields, etc., in the status quo, can use this particular art piece to tell their own stories, to tell their own cultural context, etc. And that is the tipping point, because we allow catharsis for the people who need this catharsis the most. Thirdly, we increase the value of art in the status quo primarily because of the fact that in global south you have a cultural shift in which people are going to prioritize art more. The comparative is that people have more agency in terms of what art they consume. At government, they are bound to consume art produced, monopolized art produced by corporations only. On our side, they have the ability to determine what art they want, and they're able to self-actualize. Lastly, I'll talk about the art theft, and I think this will frame out closing government as well. 3 reasons why art theft does not occur. 1, we can perfectly have an opt-in model in which this particular AI only uses pieces that people are willingly able to give. This is a precedent which exists in the status quo as well. So this frames out their you stealing art. Secondly, creative thought is something which, insofar as we've established that creative thought or human element is something which exists on our side of the world, we feel that the person in control of thought and expression can essentially use that, which essentially means that it's not really stealing. Thirdly, even if like we are stealing art, I don't have a problem with that, because art is not owned by a particular individual. Any art that is produced due to inspiration by the nature that you see, the trees that you think, or the people that you write about. Insofar as this is true, art is not singularly controlled by one individual, which means that it is okay. Even in our absolute worst case, and I'm conceding them at their best being extremely charitable, why is this exclusive? Corporations can also steal art. They made movies about slavery. They made movies about colonial history, etc. For all those reasons, pretty clear. Opening opposition.
I think the speaker will find speech. Please remember, speeches are 7 minutes 15. Stop speaking after this. I'll not write anything more down. And to open up the closing half of this debate, I'd now like to call upon the member of government. Here.
Yeah, I'd be really grateful if you all can put POIs in the chat. I'll surely take one specifically from opening up. That being said, timer. Just 1 second. Okay, I'll be starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If anybody asks me why can AI not take over humanity, I would say because human beings are creative, AI is mechanical, which means we would always have a creative edge against any technology coming, which means regardless of how good the technology is, we would be probably able to creatively maneuver it in a manner where we are able to use it rather than being replaced by it. We think that at the point when this happens within video editing industry or video creation industry, that creative edge that human beings have goes away. I will talk about how harmful these impacts can be. But before that, what is this technology likely to be used? My argument is it is likely to be used for everything. Remember, for promotion of any kind of activity whatsoever that is creative, right now you need to upload videos on Instagram and Facebook, all of which requires large-scale editing abilities, which only can be done at the point when you are spending lots of resources or hiring someone to do it. Sure, a lot of people are likely to opt into this AI because it is likely to be accessible at opening operations. But also, this is not limited to people who are uploading reels, but this can go on to writers who want their books to be translated into a video format so that people are able to enjoy it more. This goes on to musicians who wants music videos being made for the music that they have produced, thereby inputting these lyrics. The process of getting these videos is that you have to input your thought into the AI, and therefore it will give you a replicating video. I want to point out, and this is probably very important, that in order to get an exact video, you have to write down your entire chain of thought and the process that you go through so that the AI is able to generate the exact video that you want to have. You are likely to enter a few things here. First, unique value proposition. Given you want your video to be unique and non-repetitive, you are far more likely to enter your unique value proposition into the text of the AI, where you specifically get your unique ideas entered. Secondly, this probably means that you are also likely to enter the value of the organization or the individual, their identity, their political affiliation, and everything else. But because you want the best result possible, you are likely to write down things throughout the process of thinking. That is, you thought of an idea, you write it down, you saw the first output. Then you want improvements. So you write down new improvements and it improves the video. Nobody is going to take the first cut, which means all of them would go through an entire creative process where they communicate with the AI and talk about how to improve each and everything in a creative manner. This is bad because this generally means AI now has the access to the process of creativity in and of itself, because AI is able to understand how each and every human being creatively approaches their activity and therefore leads to a creative solution or creative improvements over the things that already exist. Why is this so important? This is important because of my earlier characterization where I explained everything in the world right now has to be promoted through a video mode because it is one of the most accessible modes for adults and kids alike, and because most social media algorithms operate on these modes specifically, which means that most of the creative individuals in the world are likely to use platforms like this and therefore are likely to enter their creative process into AI. Please remember, this means this AI now is able to process the creative aspect of almost each and every individual who has used it. But also this means that it now has access to the creative process of many industries, such as writing industries, filmmaking industries, video creation industries. It is now able to generate different kind of reels with different creative processes gathered from different individuals on a daily basis, thousands of them. Why is this so important? Before that, I want to give you a context to what OpenAI is doing. OpenAI right now is a company that makes no profits at all. It is burning billions of dollars every year on the basis of the investment that it has received from every major corporation in the world. Surely these corporations must want some kind of return in long term. I don't argue there would be any problems in the short term. Everything opening operations said about regulation probably is correct. However, in the long term, OpenAI gathers the data which allows it to approach each and every industry in a manner that it can create not only content, but every output that industries are able to provide without the necessity for human beings, but also at a pace where it can take control over those industries. Why don't we ban ChatGPT? Why do we need to ban this video platform? Specifically of my mechanism about how engagement on video is the highest in nature, and why only while video making, OpenAI can access the creative process of human beings, which cannot be accessed at the point when you are engaging with ChatGPT, because you are not constantly trying to get the best video outcome for your entire thought, which means this is the unique proposition on which OpenAI gets access to that creative data and therefore creates this. Given OpenAI has like raised hundreds of billions, and given it has to turn profitable in the future, but not only profitable, probably has to make billions of dollars every year in profits in order to give some returns to the investments that it has received right now, it probably means that it is likely to leverage that data in order to enter industries in totality and take out the human element, but also destroy human industries in that particular area. You might think this is far-fetched, but unless this is the plan, why are people giving so much money to this particular company? It is not because, oh my God, it can replace a few artists like OG says. I think our neck is far more stronger because we talk about a larger harm, which cannot be limited by any regulation, because tomorrow they would start a music company and they would generate more music than everyone else. I'll take opening up.
Firstly, the AI is not going to just become sentient. It's probably going to use machine learning, meaning it's always going to have human prompts. Secondly, if you buy your characterization of creativity, humans are always going to be necessary because they're always going to be more creative than the AI itself.
Panel, please note there isn't a question in that POI. It's probably an assumption. Don't take into account. Couple of things here. I think more importantly, once AI has access to this learning process, simply because it is able to create companies within these areas, that means OpenAI can create an extension which writes books and can produce 2,000 books every year. It can open an extension that creates music and create 50,000 music every year, which means it is far more likely to replace entire human industries that exist right now. Sure, some of them like Taylor Swift would still be popular, but most other artists are totally likely to be displaced because their output and OpenAI's output is likely to be similar. My analysis in terms of how it gets access to the data on human creativity, specifically in the video format, is something that I would like you to remember while evaluating this debate, because that gives you access to the best possible impact on Gov, which is destruction of entire creative industries and a takeover by OpenAI.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. And to open up the last for this debate, I'd now like to call upon the member of opposition. Here.
No, it's okay. I need to tap this.
Sorry, I couldn't properly hear you.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. Okay. Am I audible?
Hey, just one
Yes.
second. Could I take a minute? I'm like government whip, right? Just something came up. Give me a minute, please.
Okay, sure.
You know,
Right, yeah, we can go on.
All right. I'd now like to call upon the member of opposition whenever you're ready.
all right. 3. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, art has always been a competitive industry. Art, anything, regardless of whether that's film, whether that's acting, whether that's singing, whatever it might be, it is an industry where many people are are acting as waiters, trying to get an acting job, or acting as waiters, trying to get a writing job. I think it has always been something that is very difficult to get some level of success in. I think that something that opening government tells you about the destruction of the art industry and why this is so bad for jobs, this is kind of stuff that's already been happening for a significant period of time, insofar as the technologies that have been produced have already reduced the amount of jobs that you can get in the art industry, and the art industry itself is very difficult to get into. Okay, firstly, on opening government, they tell you that it's unlikely to be you're unlikely to have some level of creative control. I think they just don't necessarily talk about the idea that you have existing systems of checks and balances that already exist. What do I mean by this? OpenAI cares about its reputation. It cares about things like investors getting its investment, meaning that its idea to lobby to remove regulation, its problem to its ability to not be regulated is significantly diminished because of the idea that it needs money for it to fund itself. I think Sora is a gateway to allow creativity to occur without having this kind of without having all the negative consequences that side government actually talks about, because of the inherent incentive that OpenAI actually has to get itself to have itself regulated. Even if it does allow for some level of creation, where even if you have some people creating deepfake porn or terrible things that could occur from it. I think there are other systems of checks and balances, whereas, for example, if you upload this video to like YouTube or Twitter or wherever, those systems can also check it, meaning that there are levels of checks and balances that already exist for these videos that are created to control. Even if you don't believe me on that, the way OpenAI would actually regulate this is by like just filing for like specific text prompts, like not allowing those specific text prompts that actually exist. This already happens in ChatGPT. I don't see why it can't happen in OpenAI Sora. On the loss of jobs, people can compete with like people can compete with like large scale industries like Disney. For example, if I'm at home, I can just make my own movie rather than like having to watch a Disney movie. Meaning this leads to the complete destruction of companies like Disney, like Netflix, like Amazon. And we're going to tell you why this is actually specifically good, despite the loss of jobs. The loss of jobs itself is probably going to be a very short run consequence, which I think OG rests their entire case on. They tell you that it's going to be this going to lead to these massive layoffs and massive loss of jobs because you can just create everything within a span of a few minutes. But the problem is that as I've framed to you, that art has already been a very difficult industry to succeed in, meaning that the average person nowadays probably is not going to go into things like film, go into things like writing, because they know that it's difficult to get a job in. Insofar as you lose a bunch of jobs already, it means that more people in the long run are not going to want to go into these industries anyway, meaning that you get more people in other industries where the job market deems them valuable. Say, for example, they do things like the market may the values. For example, they go into like fields like STEM that are generally going to be considered more valuable in the long run than art necessarily. I don't think the destruction of like the art industry where people are employed and corporations exist necessitate the idea that like you need like artists to exist. Like as I mentioned, Disney produces these shitty movies. If I can have an incentive to like, what is the incentive to like actually watch Disney? Okay, so on to like our actual case and why the destruction of the art industry is particularly good. Two things. Firstly, I think that in the long run, we already have like these companies like Disney and Netflix having like these oligopolies. I think the complete destruction of these companies is particularly good because it means that the people are more likely to look for like other forms of employment. I think opening government tells you that, okay, these skills are not transferable and these skills are not going to be easily accessible to like other fields. The problem is that regardless of, it doesn't matter. It happens in every industry where when there is a new technology that is produced, people need to adapt to the market for them to have a job. I think the benefits that you get from Sora, things like, I don't know, things like AI pornography, which is probably good because you get less women who are going to be exploited in the porn industry because of the idea you can create this kind of stuff at home rather than having like the porn industry actually created and like things like child pornography actually taking place in like developing countries. I think you can at the very least significantly limit it when you have things like AI pornography being created by Sora. But then the second thing is, I think people are because you get more people in like jobs that are considered and deemed more valuable, there's going to be more economic growth in the long run. Why is this actually going to happen and why is this actually good? I think even if you destroy certain industries and destroy like the entire art industry completely, like in film industry completely, I think what this means is it's just a sign of progress when you have more people like shifting to different industries that are probably more beneficial. Okay, why are you going to get like certain like more regulation on this AI, things that opening opposition did not tell you? I've told you that there's an incentive from the perception of OpenAI to actually like regulate these things. We know that companies like Facebook and TikTok and Twitter already do this because they know that they can't spread things like misinformation. They can't do these things because it looks bad for these companies. We already see this with TikTok being grilled. And so we know that OpenAI probably has this incentive, something that opening opposition did not tell you. I think that this does not happen. This sort of regulation does not occur insofar as they do not mention the idea that OpenAI has this active incentive to like actually care about this. And also, we've taken OG's case charitably on the idea that, okay, even if you lose jobs in the long run, this is probably still beneficial. Okay, I'll take your POI.
Either Upbench has to stand behind the art being easy and democratic, where therefore layoffs happen, or they stand behind the art being real and authentic, given it takes effort to make good art, where minorities are still pushed out because of all of the structural reasons.
I think that art is still going to have the level of creativity that it already has, and probably even more, because now like art is going to be more accessible to an average individual who's not born with like talented art skills. Like if I wanted to create a movie that I like, I'm more likely to be able to create it at home by creating a text prompt, because I can describe the type of movie or describe the type of video that I want, rather than just having rather than like going to and relying on Disney, which are necessarily like profit maximizing corporations, and they specifically want to like pump out as much content as they want, and they can create shitty content, and therefore you're probably going to actually get better content, better creativity on our side of the house. The purpose of art is to provide some level of personal fulfillment. I think people are probably going to be happier because they can now create art for themselves that makes them happier. This is good for things like education, where you can teach an entire class without having to like create videos specifically. You could just like write text prompts on it. This is good for things like, as I mentioned, pornography. This is also good for things like just mental health, where you can watch something that is probably beneficial to you, rather than like having to rely on like going and watching movies and stuff. With that said, proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. And to close up the gut bench of the debate, I'd now like to call upon the government whip. Here.
You give me like a minute. Right, yeah. Am I clearly audible?
Yes.
Right, yeah, okay. I'll be taking PYs exclusively verbally. I can't see chat. Please don't put anything like there. And yeah, okay. Other than that, I'll begin on the reverse count of 3, 2, 1. Two things for you in the speech. Firstly, just taking down both opposition benches. Secondly, telling you why our case weighs over everything within this debate, in the sense of it having the largest impact, but also being the thing that benefits people individually to the largest scale on like magnitude, right? Firstly, then just taking down both opposition benches. Let's start with opening opposition. Opening opposition comes and tells you a couple of pushes. Firstly, just say, okay, for everything that is problematic with this type of art that will be generated by Sora in the first place, you're going to regulate it, and these regulations are for some reason going to be effective. I think where opening government comes and does some very, very baseline like responses to this. But even on our worst case scenario, I think it's easier to say that insofar as you're talking about AI software here, it is very easy and convenient for people who are using this technology to find jailbreaks to it, right? Which is to say, in ChatGPT today, by like engineering prompts in a very specific way that convinces the AI that you're doing a good thing, even in case it's completely against the type of regulation that exists, or against like ChatGPT's terms of like policy and the way in which they enforce that, it is still quite easy to find those jailbreaks and get whatever you want done. The same is likely to be applied to Sora, insofar as it is still like a very, very similar software, in the sense that it's taking certain prompts that you enter, and the only way that the other side can really tangibly regulate against this is to come and say, okay, then we'll just make sure that some prompts cannot be allowed. Past a certain very baseline extent, it is impossible for them to regulate that. I think that's something that they just do have to concede here, right? That people who are likely to use Sora for the worst purposes are impossible to regulate against, because you're talking about AI software that do not directly involve humans who will be capable of making those distinctions, but instead softwares that are based on algorithms which are likely to always work in a certain way, and people operate very quickly, which means that even in case you keep on putting new updates out, people will still be able to get those bad things done. None of the things they tell you about regulation are likely to stand at that point, right? But also all of the like argumentation they try to introduce about how consumer literacy happens and how large use leads to regulation just probably falls flat at the point where an open AI, by virtue of the mechanism that Anshuman gives you, gains that level of monopolistic power exclusively on our side of the house, which gives it the ability to oust itself from any form of these regulations in the first place, due to the like behemothtic levels of influence that it's able to garner, right? But also just beyond stuff like baseline like lobbying that happens, the other side tries to come and also tell you, okay, there's like investment investment that OpenAI cares about, and they face the threat of losing that investment without proving the likelihood of this. Insofar as one, OpenAI is directly affiliated with Microsoft, which actively pumps in millions of dollars into OpenAI in the status quo. I don't get why that's likely to be true. But then two, I think we've already told you, OpenAI itself becomes profitable. It does not require that level of investment in the first place. It's able to exploit entire industries. It makes enough money to be able to support itself. None of that is likely within this debate, right? Secondly, they try and tell you, okay, but like actually there's no original ideas that ever exist because you're always influenced by external sources within society around you, and therefore you never are like able to make art that is completely original. I think that's something that like we're willing to concede in our worst case again, right? It might be true that no art is completely original within the status quo due to the way that influences work. The reason that this is exclusively problematic when it involves Sora is to say that the like level to which it is influenced, or the level to which it actively takes away credit from existing artists or reduces their ability to get anything done, is considerably just a lot higher, right? But also then, like when you insert Anshuman's analysis about just the fact that this takes over the entire industry in a way that like involves OpenAI being able to monopolize everything about the way in which video generation happens, which is uniquely important due to the fact that video generation is used in a manner that is able to convey the greatest amount of information. This is uniquely problematic, right? Because even in case there's no original ideas that ever exist, the way in which you're not able to get people to get any amount of like credit for the type of work they do, or the extent to which the type of creation you get is bad on the other side, is probably a lot worse, right? But also, like, even in case you concede to this being true, everything Anshuman tells you still stands in this debate. None of that directly takes down our case. It only takes down opening. I think that's completely fine, right? And then thirdly, they try to come and tell you this analysis about, okay, there's like democratization of art that suddenly happened, which means everybody is able to access this on a much larger level. One, we're able to tell you that democratization never really happens in the tangible way, because OpenAI, sure, within the short term that happens, OpenAI within like relatively like say long-term scale within like maybe a couple of decades or a couple of years, is still able to garner that level of control, which means it's able to impose its will on the entire industry, right? It's able to control just the way in which value proposition works and the way in which people are like using this within the market, which means that even in case in the short term you're able to come and say, okay, it's completely fine that democratization happens, in the long term OpenAI gets control across this entire industry because it lacks any tangible competitor within the status quo, which means it gets the ability to put up a massive paywall, and suddenly all of the argumentation about democratization goes away. But also, even within the status quo, the other side has not told you why it's likely that no paywall exists for other OpenAI softwares like Dolly, which involves similar levels of bandwidth requirements and similar levels of services being used that cost a shit ton of money. That stuff that exists within the status quo that probably continues to exist, that just takes down a lot of the argumentation there, right? What is the comparative that Anshuman gives you against all of that? Firstly, he tells you about just the way in which you end up having to convey significant amount of information to the like Sora software itself in order to be able to refine the types of videos you generate to the extent that you're able to access the benefits you get from it, right? And like one, just within the creative process itself, but also within the corporate world when you're trying to do stuff like generate advertisements through this, you put across a significant amount of your creative process in the form of Sora. Before moving on, any POIs from opening?
On a comparative, if you value creativity so much, would you want corporations that have control over everything and don't let people exercise that creativity, or an AI software that lets people access that creativity, even if on some level for nefarious reasons, but also lessened due to regulation?
Right. I think people are able to access that. Like, I still don't know why people aren't able to access that creativity in any form in the status quo. Like, in the sense that there's multiple forms in which you're able to exercise that, and the status quo still not monopolized to the extent that happens when there's multiple contrasting corporations that are engaging in this, or this is a trend that simply exists compared to an OpenAI gets that monopolistic control across the entire industry, which reduces the way in which creativity happens, which allows for OpenAI to take down entire industries on a much larger scale that puts a much larger number of people out of employment, right? But also just finally, like, why do we weigh against all of the other houses, right? The difference in this debate is that OG argues that OpenAI would take out most artists because it can produce a lot of content, and then O says human beings have a creative element in them and they'll be able to leverage this technology. What we argue is that OpenAI learns the process of creativity itself and any protection artists had in terms of uniqueness and creativity, thereby taking away any advantage human beings have. They solve the deadlock between OG and O, which means already we just weigh against them. Overall, this last line here, what are the exclusive things you get? One, we're able to take down everything from CO and O in regards to regulation, in regards to competition. And then B, we're able to tell you how the process of creativity itself gets monopolized. So proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech, and to close up the debate as a whole, I'd now like to call upon the opposition whip. Here.
Hello. Okay.
You just
I'll
muted.
start shortly. Let me just yeah, I'm just get organized. 3, 2, 1. Okay, today I'm gonna explain why we take it over all the teams and why we take the win here. First, let's go into every single team by team and see why we beat each other. Okay, what does OG say and what is the problem? Because we think that OG is generally very short-sighted in their impacts of Sora. And they only tell you about the short-term benefits, about these people getting fired and this being bad for the job market, right? I think that they also do not understand that governments have strong incentives and will regulate technology to protect themselves or their citizens, as we have seen lately with the TikTok issue. Like, so in the United States, if the government has a strong incentive to either protect themselves or its citizens, it will go there and ban these technologies. We believe this is the thing that they can do. We beat OO because of the fact that they did not bring up the fact that OpenAI has incentives to self-regulate, which is something I think my partner did bring. But we also take OG's cases more charitably. We proved that even though there are destructive problems in the art industry short term, we still get long-term benefits. Now let's go into a bit about what CG says. I think CG again tries to participate more in the regulation clash, right? They said something about like, oh, they're not going to self-regulate, or the government's not going to self-regulate, or something like that, right? We don't think this is necessarily true. Why do we think this is not necessarily true, and why OpenAI will regulate Sora? We think this is true simply because of the fact that OpenAI is profit-driven, right? What does this mean when OpenAI is profit-driven? This means it probably has to maintain a good image in order to make more money, right? If people are using OpenAI to make a deepfake clone or something, they will probably not see this as good and probably will lose money from this due to bad PR. So therefore, they will do things within themselves, within the internal companies themselves, in order to make sure this does not happen and they themselves do not go out of hand. With a combination of government regulations that will happen, which I believe will happen because of the fact that governments, whenever they see this technology or anything that threatens its or its people, it will act. I will say, provide example with TikTok and even with other governments, like such as Chinese government with like Google and YouTube. They have an incentive to act. So we believe that the two combinations of incentive, both by the company to continue making money and the government to protect their people and the government's interest, it will be regulated, right? We also think on the creativity clash that this isn't necessarily as big of a problem as government claims, right? Why is this true? We think this is true because the average person does not really care how creative the art is, as long as they're able to view decent art to the standards as they want, right? Like, I think if you're able to view art that like just looks really good, like, oh, this is really cool, I like this, right? And they do not care as much as a creativity, right? We believe creativity matters more for artists themselves, and doesn't matter as much more who are enjoying it. I think it's more people that enjoy and don't really care about how creative this is as enjoyment, right? And we think even if it is not creative, even if people consider not creative, I still think it's close, not right now, POI later in a bit, we still think that it is really creative enough. Now, why do we think this is true? I think AI works in the fact that it combines a lot of open source data, right? Where do we see this? We probably see this as a lot of open source data from millions and millions of codes out there, and combine them and tries to use that to make your thing, right? We think that because all this is combining human creativity, this probably to a certain extent, to a large extent, is creativity on its own, because it is combining a large pool of creativity from multiple sources. So in a sense, people probably cannot tell the difference between human creativity and AI creativity because it is taking from humans anyways, right? So I'm just going to go to summarize my partner's points and why we end up winning, right? I think my partner brings you to the fact that art is a very different top career to get into anyway, right? Only like the top 1% manage to get into and make good money, right? Because it's very super competitive and requires to put a lot of effort into this, right? I would think that even though there are loss of art jobs early on, this is a short-term consequence, right? Whenever these people in on these artistic industries lose their jobs, we think that they will move into industries that are more productive for society or more valuable somewhere else, right? Like they'll probably pick up other skills or just not pick up the skill at all and go learn other skills that are more beneficial for society or beneficial for themselves like just STEM or trades or something where they can continue to make money and continue to serve society in a better way, right? And we believe that AI art, if it results in the destruction of large media companies, this is good anyway, right? Now, why is this good? This is generally good because it gives people more creativity control over themselves. They can go there and make the art they want and not just conform to whatever these big companies are cranking up, which are thinking of just lots and lots of bad content just for money, right? Whereas if AI art and AI art generation is out for good reason and very good, then people can probably produce what they want. I don't have to watch whatever these bad people are producing, right? I think my partner did also bring up the point, like a lot of like, these malicious uses of AI that might be brought up, like AI pornography or some sort of deepfake stuff, right? This at its various best, if this happens, at least it's better than it happening in real life, right? If it's a computer simulation on a server somewhere, that infinitesimally beats out it happening in real life, right? Because people are not exploited and abused for these things to happen, right? What's your POI, OG?
Given Bench concede that protecting artists is important, they have to stand behind millions of artists, including minority artists having their art stolen, which obviously wins on the sheer scale of the violation of people's rights, given how efficient AI makes this stealing.
I don't think necessarily this is that bad of a thing. Why do I think this is not a bad thing? Because whenever you put your art out in public, which is what I assume you mean by stealing. If you post it out in public, it's gonna get stolen. First of all, if they post it in the public, I think it just gives free reign for whoever wants to use it anyways, right? Like because when you post in the public domain, you yourself acknowledge that it's very difficult to control this, and you probably give up your rights over this as your private art because you willingly post it out there, which means probably give up the rights. And the artists who are doing this probably know they're doing this, probably accept the fact that someone else is going to use art, right? I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing because if they're willing to post it, it means they give up the rights of how it's usage and whoever wants to use it, right? So we're not winning because I think we bring you more long-term benefits. We're going to bring you more long-term benefits for society when people are better able to create art that they want for their own personal fulfillment, as well as contributing to society in different ways, continue to be able to make money, and also bring you less abuse to people in certain industries because computer-generated imagery is better than certain things happening in real life. I'm done. Thanks.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech and everyone for this fine debate. Please, everyone leave the room.